So we'll return to it. But Bible Heavyweight says, my Muslim friends argue that monogamy is an invention of Paul. They go to 2 Samuel 12:8 to prove God ordained polygamy for David. What's your understanding of that verse? Oh boy. Do people realize that how much trouble it is to even have one wife? Is your mind and her mind, and God's job is to unite the two, and that already causes issues. But God can sanctify that. Imagine that, doing that with more than one wife. So practically doesn't work. And you can see that in the trouble that these individuals got themselves for having more than one wife. But Jay, I'll let you take it there while I do a little research on something.
Yeah, it says, and I gave thee thy master's house and thy master's wives into your bosom, and gave thee the house of Israel and of Judah. If I had been too little, I would have moreover given you such and such things. I think we have to understand that with God, there is something called the perfect will of God, and there is something called the permissive will of God, which means like God set things up at the very beginning how he wanted. When we look at what Jesus says, he says, look, have you not heard from the beginning? It was man and woman, right? And actually, let me actually go to that. What was that? Matthew chapter, I think it was 18, or 19. Matthew chapter 19, I think it was, right? Where he talks about teaching about divorce. Okay, so he says this: have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this cause shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let no man put asunder. So what we can see here is at the very beginning, and Jesus appeals to how things were at the beginning, when God intended for man to have one wife. But then we see, even in this context, we see something called the permissive will of God, right? That was the perfect will of God, but the permissive will of God is this. They say unto him, why did Moses then command a writing of divorcement, and to put her away? He saith unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered you to put away your wives. But from the beginning, it was not so. So what we can see here is that Jesus is saying, look, God allowed divorce to come in. God allowed all these other things to come in. But at the beginning, that was not his perfect will. When you start to see from the very beginning that God did set up one husband and one wife, then we just simply ask the question, well, where did multiple wives come from? And if you know the story of Cain and Abel, you can see that the first person to actually do this was from the wicked descendants of Cain, right? It says, and Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch, and he built a city, called the name of that city after the name of his son Enoch. And Enoch was born, unto Enoch was born Irad, and Irad begot Mahujel. Mahujel begot Methuselah, and Methuselah begot Lamech. And Lamech took unto him 2 wives. And that's the first time we see people going away from the perfect will of God after an order of a wicked line. And so this was, again, not the perfect will of God, but he allowed it. And then what you see is, all of these great men of God, they picked up this habit of having multiple wives. But then you look at the conditions that came out of all of them. What happened with, Samson, or not Samson? Who was it? Samson? Who was the wisest person? Was that Samson? No, Solomon. You look
Solomon.
at Solomon, right? You look at Solomon and all the issues he had. All these women took him away from doing God's will. You have, David and all these great men that had multiple wives and all the trouble that it came with. God allowed these things to happen so that people, thank you, Michelle, it was Solomon. God allowed all these things to happen so that people could see, like, this is not good. The perfect will that he had set up was excellent from the very beginning. I'll give 2 more verses and then I'm done. Deuteronomy 17:17 is a good verse. It's talking about kings, right? It says, a king, neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away, neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. It was not for kings to multiply wives to themselves. And the New Testament tells us that God has made us priests and kings. So it is not the will of God for us to have this. And he hath made us kings and priests unto God and his Father. So it wasn't for kings to have multiple wives, right? And we are kings in the sight of God. So, and of course, as you can see, even the leaders of the church, they were not to have that. A bishop must be blameless, the husband of one wife, right? And this doesn't mean the husband of a first wife. No, I think it's more consistent that it's the husband of one wife. And yeah, it's not the will of God. We look at how marriage was supposed to be a reflection of Jesus Christ. You read Ephesians chapter 5. How many wives did Jesus have? He has one bride. We should follow after that order.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, avoid the trouble and just do it as God designed. Somebody commented in the chat and said, God is the designer, and as a designer, he decides how to best create his, design his creations. Fact of the matter is, he designed the male and female, and ordained it to be just one spouse. So, sin caused these issues, but just because sin caused these things to take place doesn't necessarily mean that was God's original intent. So I think who are these? Our Mormon folks. They are highly mistaken. There's some Hebrew Israelites who believe this too, Jason. I don't know if you knew that.
Did I tell you about my conversation? Remember I told you I got kicked out of a conversation?
Over that. Yeah, I remember. Oh boy, I tell you. I think some men just love trouble. All right, let's go to the next one.